Hey everyone, continuing the series on taking on opponents of different rating levels. Today we've got a 700 rated opponent, so if you're around that level yourself, I'm going to show you the way that I think, we're going to see the way that my opponent plays, and help you to bring yourself a little bit closer to my way of thinking. That's the plan. So we've started off with a Sicilian defense. I've got the black pieces, and so far my opponent has played very sensibly, bringing a pawn out into the center of the board, developing a piece. This is all good stuff from my opponent so far. So at the 700 level, quite often players already know the opening fundamentals quite strongly, so you'll tend to get the opening played quite well. Just generally bring out the pieces, get castled. That'll be the way that people play at the 700 level. The difference in the way that stronger players play becomes more apparent later in the game, I would say. Okay, so we've got this check here, and I'm quite happy to just block the check, and if there's a trade, then no problem, I'll recapture with the queen. The reason that I'll recapture with the queen is because I want my knight to come out to the c6 square. This is a bit of a positional, a questionable decision from my opponent here actually, to offer the trade of the light squared bishops, because quite often this is white's best attacking minor piece. Like if it comes to c4, then it can be quite strong. But just at the moment, I do have the option of capturing here, after which the knight would obviously need to recapture. And then I could actually develop or gain a tempo against that knight. So I'm going to capture here, he'll capture back, and then I can play a6, which is a move that I wanted to play anyway. And then the knight will have to go back, and I'll have gained something small, but it's all about small improvements in the opening by getting my pawn to a6. It's a slight improvement over, over not having the pawn on a6. Because on a6 we can use it to push b5 later on. So the knight's going to need to go back to c3, I would imagine. And then I can just continue with my development. Knight to f6. And this is a better version of the opening for me than if I had to spend a move playing a6. Because I was able to play a6 by pushing away the white knight, it's a little bit better for me. Okay, so we've just got d3 from my opponent, reinforcing the e4 pawn. And it's important to complete your development before starting any fireworks. Bishop to g5 makes sense, I suppose, pinning the knight. Now a common move that you might see would be h6, putting the question to the bishop. But I'd rather spend that move developing a piece. Got to be a little bit careful about moves like h6. Because that weakens the pawn structure around your own king. I don't really want to do that. If white wants to capture on f6, then he's very welcome to do so. I can recapture with the bishop, and then I'll have a strong, uncontested dark squared bishop. So my opponent's castled, and I'm just going to do the same. So nothing fancy, nothing that any of you watching couldn't do. Just get your pieces out, develop naturally, and the opportunities will present themselves later. That's what I'm expecting. Now, if you're enjoying the video so far, I'm doing an entire series of playing opponents at different rating levels. So if you want to make sure you don't miss out on any of the future videos, go ahead and click the subscribe button. You can find the level that you're currently at, watch me play against an opponent of that level, and learn from it. So my opponent's thinking now. It's kind of like he's got his development finished, and what's next? What's the plan? So the king's castled, all the minor pieces are off their starting squares. What to do now? Well, one idea could be to connect the rooks. You could do that by a move such as queen to d2, but he hasn't done that. He's gone ahead and just moved his bishop back, which is a bit of an unusual move. By just moving the bishop back a square unprovoked, I don't see what he's gained. I don't think he's gained anything, so I'm just going to continue developing. Future ideas can include b5. I could also consider bringing the queen to c7. that would connect the two rooks. If I play queen to c7, they'd be seeing each other. And from here, you just want to bring the rooks to the files which are most likely to open. Now that's usually the central files. You could also look to try to play a pawn break in the center, but it's a bit hard to do that just at the moment. Like if I were to play d5, then white would have the option of responding with e5, and then the knight would have to move away. So I don't want to play d5 unless my opponent is unable to meet it with e5. So I'm going to try and get this plan in. Now the fact that he's played h3 is another quite slow move. He might be trying to give the bishop an escape square, maybe back here, but again, that move was a bit unprovoked. My opponent should really just continue with development rather than moves such as bringing the bishop back without me forcing it to, or playing a pawn move on the side of the board like h3. Now the difference between h3 for white, and how this is a bit of a waste of time, and a6 for me, which is, I believe, not a waste of time, is because a6 has an idea behind it. It supports me being able to play b5. Now I've got a choice here between playing b5, just to show that idea, potentially bothering the knight on c3, or at least having the idea to, or bringing the queen to c7. Now one thing about queen to c7 is that white might play bishop to g3. That's kind of what he's telegraphing here. So I'm just going to grab space on the queen side. Partly this is about knowing the opening that I'm playing. So in the Sicilian, generally black is trying to push on the queen side, whereas white's prospects lie on the king side. This is one reason why that light squared bishop, which my opponent so willingly traded right at the start of the game, right, with this sequence here, by losing the light squared bishop, white has lost some of their potential for a kingside attack. Like imagine if the bishop was on b3, for instance, then it would have a decent diagonal. Now white would still have some work to do to open up that diagonal by getting this wall of pawns to break apart, but he's kind of missing this light squared bishop to try to get an attack going. Now rook to e1 I actually like. I think this is a solid move from my opponent, so nice job there. I'm prepared to give credit where credit is due. And now it's kind of like, what next? I can bring my rook to the c-file. This can often be an idea that the c-file can open up at some point. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. Because if white plays d4 at some moment, then I can capture and then I'll have a semi-open c-file. This pawn on c2 can often be a target for black. Like black can target this pawn on c2. Now, if you'd like me to help you analyze your games in the same way that I'm analyzing my own play here, just to let you know that I help ambitious adults at the below 2000 ELO level improve their chess. So if you'd like to explore working together and get my thoughts on improving your middle game play, then click the link in the description below. It's the pinned comment or at the top of the description, and we can see if working together will be a good fit. So now my opponent is trying to come up with a plan. He's probably contemplating something like e5. That would be one move that we could expect, given that rook to e1 was played. Now often all you need to do to win at this level is to just be solid, because 700 rated opponents often struggle when they are faced with an opponent who doesn't make any obvious mistakes. Like they're kind of used to facing someone who is going to give them free material or the opportunity to win free material. Now, I kind of expected this move. I thought that d4 would have come at some point, and now I've got a choice here between capturing straight away, that's one idea, or I could play this move b4 first. Now if I played b4 first, I would imagine that the knight would probably go over to the edge of the board, and then I could capture, and then there'd be knight takes back, I take back here, and then queen here. I certainly want to capture on d4. The question is whether I'd like to play b4 first. I'm just going to capture here first because I feel as though I'd like to keep this move in reserve. There's an expression in chess that sometimes the threat is stronger than the execution. Well, I'm imagining that we're going to get knight takes back, and after I could capture, or I could play knight here as well. It's another interesting idea, actually. Because if knight takes knight here, then I could bring the knight over here to attack the dark squared bishop. And then maybe it's actually me who ends up having some sort of a kingside attack. I could also bring the queen over here, asking white to be the one to initiate the capture. So there's a few good moves here. There's a few good possibilities. I quite like this knight to e5 because I could bring the knight to c4 as well. I feel like this is the more dynamic way of playing. So now I've got a couple of threats. One of them is to come in here, knight to c4, that would attack this pawn, or knight to g6. So in general, when you're facing an opponent who's a bit lower rated than you, it's good to remember that the complications favour you as the higher rated player. Because the more pieces that are traded, the simpler it gets for your opponent to play. So, just on principle here, this is a trade which would simplify the position a bit for white. So I'd rather keep pieces on the board. I'd rather keep threats alive. This knight looks quite strong in the center, but it doesn't actually have any good destination squares to go to. I mean, it could go back, but often players don't like playing moves which simply go back to the square that it just came from. And I've got this threat of coming in here. And a move that we could potentially expect would be b3, but he hasn't done that. Okay, so he's gone with f4 instead. Now, I half expected this move. I thought that we might see this. And it's a more aggressive way of playing, but it also opens up this diagonal towards the white king. So just keep an eye on that. On f4, which is a move that I thought might come, what I had in mind was to bring the knight over to c4, attacking this pawn. Now, he might advance, and if he does advance, then he will have weakened his dark squares. And I'd have to at least consider the possibility of advancing myself there, or going back. I'm not quite sure yet. But the point is I'm starting to create threats now. In chess, it's great if you can play with the initiative, as in you should be the one who's creating the threats. That way, there's a good chance that your opponent can make a mistake, because when you start asking your opponent difficult questions, there's a chance that he could get one of those questions wrong. So there's a threat on the pawn here. Let's see how my opponent's going to react. If I were him, well, queen to c1 is one possibility, but then that does leave the knight without a defender. And there could be some problems on the dark squares if this queen moves away. Something like queen to b6 followed by e5 is one possible plan. Now white could also just ignore this threat, although I think in that case he would just be losing a pawn. Okay, but he's gone and reacted a different way by defending with the rook. Now here I have a tactic. This is known as removing the defender. So I can capture this pawn, which is responsible for defending this knight. Now this rook that I brought over from a8 to c8, I wasn't entirely sure what the point of it would be. Like I had some kind of idea that the c file would open up, and that's what's happened. But I couldn't have expected this exact position. So I wasn't calculating ahead. I was just playing on fundamentals, creating threats, and now we're going to see that one of these threats has come through for me. So I can take here, the queen is attacked, so he has to react to that, and the most obvious way of reacting to it is by taking the knight, but after that I'm going to take his knight, and I'm going to be a pawn up. Always important though, in these critical lines, to look at an extra move. So in that position where these two knights are gone, and the white rook is on b2, and my rook is on c3. Is there anything for white in that position? He could attack the rook with the knight, like I'm picturing my own rook on c3 here, but I'm not worried about that. He could also attack it this way, but then I could either reinforce it or go back. So I'm actually going to go for this line. I've done my calculation, I've done my blunder check, and I'm happy to see that this move is going to win me a pawn. White's going to take back, and I'm going to take on c3. Nice little tactic there. And if you want to improve your tactical play as well as your strategic play, then just a reminder to go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I do all kinds of content on chess, including videos like this one where I'm playing against opponents live, but also analysis of my own games, analysis of master games, and I also enjoy putting together instructional videos to help people out improve their own play. So, what could be next for white here? White's down a pawn, so you've got to try and create counterplay in such a situation where you're down material. So one idea to do that would be to play e5. This is one thing that this advance of the f-pawn makes more possible. My opponent hasn't gone for this, but what I was looking at was e5, I take, he takes back, and then he'd have a pawn on e5, which is defended by the rook, and then I'd have to move the knight away. But okay, we didn't get to see that. So instead, queen to d2, that attacks the rook. Now, here's a good concept to keep in mind. When you find one of your pieces attacked, it's best not to go backwards. It's best instead, if you can, to defend the attacked piece. So I wouldn't want to retreat the rook. Better instead is to add defense to it. So now, well, basically white can't take that rook, right? I've got an extra defender on it. So this rook stays active. He won't be able to play bishop to g3 now because that square's covered. So this rook is very well placed, and I want to keep it there if I can. And I can keep it there via the move I just played, queen to c7. Worth noting too that white has a very high likelihood of ending up quite weak on the dark squares, given that he's played f4 and the dark squared bishop is in no man's land over on h4. There's this very juicy diagonal here, which I'd love to get one of my pieces to, particularly the dark squared bishop, if I get the chance. But I'm also a pawn up, so I don't need to do anything too crazy here. I can just also play with the extra material. So we've got rook to b1. So the problem with this is that it fails to notice what the rook was doing previously on e1. There's a framework which I teach to my students, which is called the squares left behind framework. So every move that your opponent plays, you want to look at which squares that piece was formerly defending. So back here, this rook was formerly guarding the e2, e3, and e4 squares. Once it moves over to b1, those squares are no longer defended. So how could I take advantage of that? Well, I could take advantage of that by playing knight takes e4. White's problem is that if I play knight takes e4, this not only grabs a pawn, but it also comes with a threat against the queen. So knight takes e4, he's going to have to react to this threat against the queen. There are no good checks. And also, by capturing on e4, it's going to reveal an attack with my dark squared bishop. So white is going to need to play, I think, queen to e1, just to hold on to the defense of that bishop. If after knight takes e4 he plays another move, let's say he retreats to d1 instead, then I can take the bishop on h4. So I'm happy with this capture, and now I'm up a second pawn, and depending on what white does, I could be up even more material. I think he has to play queen to e1 here. He can't play queen to f2 because the knight covers that square. And I think any other move, I'm either going to win the queen or I'm going to win the bishop. So queen to e1, I think, is the move that my opponent's got to play here. Let's see if he finds it. You can see how useful the squares left behind formula can be to find moves in positions where you're trying to find a tactic, but you know, it's easier to find tactics when you've got these frameworks to guide you. All right, so he does find queen to e1, which I believe is the best move. And now I can capture here, and white could actually capture the knight. That's one thing that he could do. I'd be happy to see that. I think the better move after I capture here would be for him to capture on h4 instead. I also still have this idea of pinning and potentially winning this knight. So here's the sequence that I'm looking at. I'm looking at bishop takes h4, queen takes h4. He could also take on e4 instead, but I'm not too worried about that. Then he'd be just critically weak on the dark squares. So I'm expecting queen takes back, and then queen to c5 with a pin on this knight. The knight can't move away because it's pinned, and then I've got the possibility of potentially playing e5 to win the knight thanks to the pin. So I'm going to go for this. I'm expecting the queen to take back, and then my follow-up move is going to be queen here. I mean, another concept of capturing the bishop here, apart from the fact that I'm looking to pin the knight next, is just to simplify when you're ahead material. I mean, think about this in your own games. How many times have you been up material and then you've gone on to lose the game? We can all think of times where that's happened. Well, the more pieces you trade, the simpler it gets. So that's what I'm going for here. All right, so my opponent has actually captured the knight, which I didn't think he'd do, but that is what he's done. So I think I can still follow through with my plan of just pinning the knight here. And then this dark squared bishop is going to be very tough for white to deal with. So queen here, the knight's pinned. Let's say he moves out of the way. That would be quite reasonable. I could then bring the bishop over to this diagonal where it's attacking the knight and also x-raying the rook. This plan makes a lot of sense, and I don't think I need to spend too much time thinking about it. You will notice that the time is getting a little low, so sometimes you need to play a move which is obvious without doing all of the double checks and triple checks. I mean, I do still have 5 minutes though. This should be comfortable enough. But the key thing in a position like this is to, number one, look to trade pieces, keep everything solid. Being 2 pawns up, that should be enough to win the game eventually. And the second thing is to keep the threats going. So this is an annoying move. It's a move which white probably has to react to, and that is what he's done, which I think was the right thing to do, honestly. But now I can keep creating threats, and I can also put the bishop on a square where it's defended. So now the knight's attacked twice, and he's gone for a sacrifice, which is an interesting choice. But the decision to sacrifice the knight simply doesn't work. I mean, okay, he's going to get 2 pawns for the piece, and he's going to get to give a spite check, but that's about it. So he's going to take here with check, and I can simply move out of the way. He's trying to create some complications, which I respect. I mean, when you're losing, you have to try something, right? Otherwise, you're just going to lose slowly. But I think this is going to mean that my opponent is going to lose quickly instead of slowly. So now I not only have an extra couple of pawns, now I have a clean extra piece. I have this dark squared bishop, and white doesn't have a dark squared bishop or any minor pieces left at all. So the simple way to continue here is to just trade everything and win in the endgame. And that might actually be the best way to go. Let's see. you also want to balance that with playing the most active, aggressive moves at times. So what makes most sense here? Can I actually force the queen trade? That's a good question. Queen to c8 is very solid. So if we get the trade here, then white does get to take this pawn at the end. What else could there be? Looking at this move as well, because if you capture here, then I can capture here with check, and then this bishop might come to life. So should I be following my own advice here? I think I've seen another good move here though. I think I've seen another good move. Now, taking advantage of the fact that this bishop is on this diagonal, what we can do is we can play rook to e3. Now that attacks the white queen, which is going to need to move. It could move by capturing here. That's one possibility. But after that I can go for the queen trade and then capture here at the end. Let's do a double check. So rook here. The good thing is that the rook is being defended by the queen. If white moves the queen away, then I can capture this rook. If white captures here, then I can go for the queen trade. This looks very strong to me, actually. So sometimes it's not the capture which makes the most sense. I mean, I think in this case, a lot of players here would have captured on c2 instead. But then after that, you've got to calculate the rook coming down, and you know, white is getting some kind of activity there with his queen and his rook on d6, and it's just a bit uncomfortable, really. I mean, I don't want to allow any counter chances. So yeah, I was looking at a queen trade. But now I'm simply going to win this rook. And now I'm up a rook and a bishop. And so if I wasn't looking for the queen trade before, then I definitely should be now. So how to do that? I would expect that my opponent is probably going to play the rook to capture on d6. That looks quite likely. I just have to be a little bit careful of the back rank, that's all. But what my opponent has done instead is just left their rook on a square where I can take it. Maybe this is his way of resigning without resigning. But now I'm up 2 rooks and a bishop, and pretty quickly I can bring a rook over here with a checkmate threat. The only thing I need to worry about is not losing on the back rank. This pattern of the 2 pawns in front of the king is something that I'm paying attention to. I mean, it'd be a tragedy to lose a game from a position like this, wouldn't it? With a move such as rook takes f4, because then you'd be rather embarrassed after queen to d8. But actually, even then I'd be all right, because I could just drop the queen back. But still, don't want to allow any counter chances. Being up this much material, all I need to do is just trade the one remaining piece that white has, and that should be the end of the game. Well, we had a good game there, I think. My opponent did lose a pawn at some point, but other than that, I think he played the opening quite well. Now that you've seen me take on a 700 rated opponent, click here to see the next level up. This series sees me go from 0 to 2000, taking on opponents at every level and showing you how you can win against all of them.